Hello, you are watching Shalom World News. I'm Rory McLennan coming to you from Glasgow, Scotland. Here are the latest headlines from around the world. Pope Francis has made a plea for prayers for South Sudan amid the escalating conflict that has forced thousands to flee their homes in the upper Nile State. Following his customary Sunday Angelus, the Holy Father urged the faithful to pray for peace and national reconciliation in the country. This comes after the United Nations Refugee Agency issued a warning that the country's humanitarian situation has worsened due to the resurgence of hostilities in the Upper Nile State. Since August, at least 20,000 individuals have reportedly been compelled to abandon their homes. Separately, blessing the statuettes of baby Jesus brought by the faithful, the Holy Father urged them to pray for children. After blessing statues brought by children, the pontiff invited the faithful to pray, especially for children forced to live through war. The tradition takes place on the third Sunday of Advent and is known as Bambinelli Sunday. The ceremony originated during the papacy of Pope St. Paul VI and encourages all children and families to bring the statues of baby Jesus from their nativity sets at home for a blessing by the Pope. Members of various ethnic groups, including Tibetans and Uyghurs, condemned the Chinese government's rights abuses by protesting in cities along the American West Coast. The protests were held on December the 10th, which is observed as World Human Rights Day. Scores of people gathered in Seattle and Portland to protest against the persecution of minorities in China. In San Francisco, there was a big protest outside the Chinese consulate. Among the protesters were people holding blank papers in support of the anti-pandemic demonstrations in Chinese cities. These sheets of paper have become a sign of mass protests against the strict zero-COVID policy of the communist government. The Primate of All Ireland, Archbishop Eamon Martin of Armagh, has said that the recent UK Supreme Court ruling ratifying buffer zones around abortion facilities will further silence the voice of the unborn. In a statement, the prelate said that the judgment was tantamount to prohibiting pro-life activities such as prayer vigils and respectful witness outside abortion clinics. He also alleged that the new bill has potentially wide implications for freedom of religion and speech. Archbishop Martin said the judgment sows the seeds of fear that freedom of religion and that free expression and association is being eroded. He concluded by saying that in a world where there is so much death and violence, it is all the more significant to bear witness to the dignity of all human life. In yet another setback to the Biden administration, the US Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit ratified a lower court verdict that went in favour of the plaintiffs in Sisters of Mercy v. Becerra. This lawsuit concerned a coalition of Catholic groups who challenged the administration's bid to prevent doctors and hospitals from discriminating against transgender patients using the Affordable Care Act. It was on Friday that the Federal Appeals Court permanently blocked the administration from mandating that religious doctors and hospitals should perform transgender medical services that go against their faith and conscience. According to Catholic groups comprising hospitals, a university and a congregation of nuns, the Biden administration's rule went against their freedom of religion. It was in August that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals held that the federal government cannot coerce Christian medical outfits to perform abortions or surgeries that alter one's gender using the Affordable Care Act. After Pope Francis shed tears while expressing closeness with suffering Ukraine recently, the war-torn nation's foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba said the tears are a sign of the Pope providing a much-needed spiritual support symbol to the conflict-affected people. Adding that the papal compassion has deeply touched Ukrainians, the minister put forth his hopes for a papal visit to the country. During an interview with various journalists, Kuleba particularly mentioned the Pope's Angelus, which was completely dedicated to the war in Ukraine, urging the Russian president to end the conflict soon. The minister then continued by saying that the moment has yet to come for peace negotiations with Russia. However, he reiterated his willingness to work alongside the Vatican to establish peace in Ukraine. The Pope was also seen to weep while attending the annual ceremony in Rome to celebrate the Feast of the Immaculate Conception at the celebrated Column of Our Lady in Rome. The new monarch of the United Kingdom, King Charles III, visited the victims of Christian persecution during an Advent event in London. The papal charity Aid to the Church in Need took part in the event, which took place on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. During the event, Father Alfred Ibalu, a survivor of kidnapping and related violence in Nigeria, called attention to the escalating persecution of Christians and other minorities in the African continent's most populous nation. A summary of the increased persecution in other African countries followed Father Ibalu's statement. The Anglican Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and Bishop of London, Dame Sarah Mullally, were also present at the event. In addition, representatives of social action, welfare groups and Christian charities attended the meeting at King's House, which is a centre of worship, community outreach and mission run by King's Cross Church. The event concluded with an Advent service comprising carols, prayers and blessings with inputs from King's Cross Church, the Archbishop of Canterbury himself and Coptic Orthodox Archbishop Angelos of London. On the second anniversary of the historic apostolic visit of Pope Francis to Iraq, the Middle Eastern country is gearing up to host a high-level interreligious dialogue between Shiite Muslim clerics and Christian scholars in March next year. The conference is slated to take place between Baghdad and Najaf, which is a holy place for Shiites. The event will also commemorate the historic meeting between the Roman Pontiff and Ayatollah al-Sistani. Last week, a delegation of Shiite scholars hailing from Najaf was welcomed by Chaldean Patriarch Louis Raphael Sacco in Baghdad. During the meeting, there were discussions on the contents of the upcoming event and other details regarding its organisation. The Shiite delegation comprised Syed Jawad Muhammad Taqi al-Kowei, Secretary-General of the Al-Kowei Institute, and Syed Zaid Bar al-Ulum, Professor at the Hawza of Najaf, which is one of the oldest schools of Shiite clerics founded in the 11th century by Sheikh al-Tusi. In Mexico, where the debate over the display of nativity scenes in public is raging, activists of Pasos por la Vida and America Rangel, the deputy of Zocalo, or the central square of Mexico City, placed a Christmas creche in the plaza on Sunday. This comes ahead of the possible verdict of the Supreme Court of Justice of the nation that could prevent the public display of such religious symbols. Rangel said they would not allow liberals to rob them of their religious freedom or Mexican traditions. Pasos por la Vida highlighted that a family that responded to adversity is a model for so many mothers and fathers in this country and cannot be erased or ignored. Supreme Court Minister Juan González Alcántara Carranza wants to prohibit religious symbols in public spaces. If the draft bill is approved, images of the Virgin of Guadalupe and nativity scenes could be banned from the public domain. A Hong Kong court has sentenced Catholic philanthropist and media mogul Jimmy Lai to 5 years and 9 months in jail. He was convicted of fraud on December the 10th in a row over a contract. Lai was the founder of the now-defunct Apple Daily newspaper, which supported democracy. He had recently completed a 20-month prison term after being sentenced under multiple charges for taking part in agitations and unauthorised assemblies. Mr. Lai is going to face another trial on national security charges, and if found guilty, he could receive life imprisonment. The latest lawsuit is about how one of his firms flouted the terms of the lease agreement of his newspaper's office. It was in October that the philanthropist and his newspaper executive were found guilty of fraud. A German humanitarian worker who had been held captive in Niger for more than 4.5 years has been released. That is according to the German charity organisation HELP. 63-year-old aid worker Jörg Lange has been freed after being abducted from western Niger. The organisation which employed Mr. Lange verified his release on Saturday, but did not specify how it was achieved or where he is. Lange, who headed the organisation in Niger, was abducted by unknown armed people on motorbikes in the year 2018 from the town of Inates near the border of Mali. The crisis unit made dozens of attempts to obtain Lange's release over the years, though his captors continued to demand money via repeated letters. Lange, an engineer by training, had spent more than 30 years working in the aid sector before he was abducted. In the Sahel region, militants affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are exploiting civilians by abducting them for ransom. 6 months after a terrorist attack that left 39 Catholics dead and more than 80 wounded at a parish church of Nigeria's Ondo Diocese, Bishop Femi Ajakaye has decried that the government's promises to arrest and prosecute the killers have produced no results. Through a statement issued earlier this month, the local ordinary of Ekiti Diocese has called for the prosecution of the suspects arrested in connection with the attacks. However, the prelate lamented that although some suspects have been arrested, prosecutors have not proceeded with the case. The June the 5th attack on the Nigerian Catholic parish in Owo involved armed men who fired at worshippers and detonated explosives. After a few days, security officials reported the arrest of some suspects said to be involved in the massacre. Urging security officials to provide an update on the investigation, the prelate called for the prosecution of those in custody. To encourage the registration of volunteers for World Youth Day 2023 in Portugal's capital Lisbon, organisers have launched a campaign called World Youth Day Needs You. According to the event's Director of Communications, the campaign's goal is to mobilise and promote awareness among everyone who wants to sign up as a volunteer and assist in welcoming youth throughout the conference. The International Youth Meeting will take place from August the 1st to the 6th next year. According to organisers, the initiative expects to recruit 20 to 30,000 volunteers. Volunteers over 18 years of age should be available for 2 weeks, 1 week for formation and the second week for the youth meeting itself. Through the social networks of World Youth Day Lisbon 2023, the campaign will be promoted in Portugal and around the world. And those are your latest headlines. Do join us again tomorrow for more, and do remember, you can always visit swnews.org for more updates. Shalom.